Check out this house on a quiet street. It looks like any other house around, calm and peaceful. But something unforgettable happened here in 2012. Heather Jackson and her 2 kids lived in this house. One day, Heather stopped answering her phone, which was unusual for her. Her friends and mom got worried and called the police. The officer came, knocked on the door, looked through the windows, and didn't see anything strange, so he left. But Heather's friends knew something was wrong. They decided to break down the door and go inside, and then they had to call 911. Today, let's look at what happened in Sandusky, Ohio, in 2012. Heather Jackson, a 23-year-old mom, was raising her 2 kids, 3-year-old Celina and 1-year-old Wayne Jr. She found a cozy house on a quiet street near Lake Erie, which made her happy. Life had been tough for Heather recently. She was going through a divorce from her high school sweetheart, Wayne. Their once happy marriage had fallen apart after they had children. Despite the challenges, Heather didn't give up. She worked hard to give her kids a good life and keep them happy. At 2:30 p.m. on September 8, 2012, Danielle Sorrell, a close friend of Heather, arrived at Heather's house as planned. She knocked on the door but got no response. Danielle tried all the doors around the house, but they were locked. It was unusual for Heather and her kids to be missing, especially since they had plans to meet. Danielle tried calling Heather's mom, Jody, who was very close to Heather and talked to her every day, but Jody couldn't reach Heather either. Danielle also called Heather's other friends, but no one knew where she might be. Danielle saw Celina's pacifier on the porch and got even more worried. She knew Heather wouldn't leave the house without it. Hours went by, but Heather still hadn't called her back. Jody, feeling very anxious, decided to call the police for a welfare check. When the officers arrived, they knocked on the door but got no response. They checked around the house and peered through the windows, but everything looked normal. There were no signs of forced entry or anything suspicious. Since they didn't have a warrant, they had to leave without going inside. Around 7:30 p.m., Heather's friends, Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, showed up at her house because they were worried she was missing. They knocked on the front door, but no one answered. Dan went around to the back porch, broke open the door, and went inside. They found Heather's body in her bedroom and quickly called 911. Police officer Sergeant Eric Graybill arrived at the scene. He discovered Heather's body stuck between the box spring and mattress with a rope around her neck. The TV was still on, but the children were not in their room, it was empty. While checking the house, the officers found one last door they hadn't opened, a utility closet. When Sergeant Eric Graybill opened it, he saw some boxes stacked inside. Behind the boxes, he found the lifeless bodies of Heather's children. Shocked and horrified, the police quickly secured the area. It was the most terrible thing they had ever seen, and they couldn't understand how anyone could be so cruel to harm innocent children. Heather's family and friends were deeply shocked by the forensic results. The court documents reveal that Dr. Diana Scala Barnett, the deputy coroner, performed the autopsies. She found that Heather Jackson died from strangulation using a ligature. Additionally, Heather's rectum was unusually open, suggesting that something was placed inside it around the time of her death. Dr. Scala Barnett also reported that Wayne Jackson and Celina Jackson died from similar strangulation. Celina's underwear was found rolled up, showing that her body had been redressed, and her rectal dilation was like her mother's, suggesting something was inserted there at the time of her death. Forensic scientist Julie Cox from the Bureau of Criminal Investigation testified that seminal fluid was found on Celina's anal swabs and that a stain in her underwear contained a sperm cell. The police were eager to find the criminal behind the recent crimes. Heather lived near the Firelands Regional Medical Center, so they hoped the building's security cameras might provide some clues. Reviewing the CCTV footage, they saw a car pull up to Heather's house at 10:57 p.m. Unfortunately, the camera was far away and the night was dark, so it was hard to make out details. All they could see were the car's headlights. The car backed into the driveway and stayed there for a while. At 11:08 p.m., the headlights came on again, and the car drove away. Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, who found Heather's body, were taken to the police station to answer questions. They were questioned separately, starting with Dan Reiner. Dan had called 911 when Heather went missing and had checked her house. He said he had to force the door open to get in. Since he was in Heather's house when he called 911, the police asked him for a DNA sample. Dan agreed right away, and after they took a swab from his mouth, he was free to go. The investigators talked to Thomas Hansen. He told them he had called Heather the night before and was near her house around 11 p.m. He said he parked his car outside her house and talked to her briefly but didn't go inside. The CCTV footage confirmed that Thomas was the one driving the car seen there. Thomas also mentioned that he didn't go inside because Heather had a man named Josh with her, someone Thomas knew. When Heather went missing, Thomas went to her house to find out what happened. After taking a DNA sample from him, the police let him go. The police decided to look closely at Josh Case, the man who was at Heather's house before she died. They quickly found him and brought him in for questioning. Josh admitted he knew Heather and that he was at her house that night. He said they watched TV while the kids were asleep, then he went out to buy breakfast for them. He came back and stayed until a friend picked him up around 1 a.m. Josh also admitted that he and Heather had an intimate encounter. The investigators went to the store where Josh said he bought breakfast for the children and reviewed the CCTV footage. It turned out that Josh was telling the truth. He entered the store at 11:20 p.m. His testimony was confirmed, but the fact that he was in the store did not negate the possibility that he could be responsible for this terrible crime. He was the last known person Heather had contact with, which made him the prime suspect. He also provided a sample of his DNA. Laboratory results showed that Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner had nothing to do with what happened to Heather and her children because their DNA did not match the one found on the bodies. As for Josh Case's DNA, it matched the DNA on Heather Jackson's body but did not match the samples taken from her children's bodies. This meant there was another man in the house that night. Josh had previously admitted that he was in an intimate relationship with Heather, which explained the presence of his DNA on Heather's body. But now the police had to look for another person whose DNA would match the one found on the bodies of all three victims. The investigators quickly excluded Heather's husband Wayne, with whom she was going through a divorce process, from the list of suspects because he lived in another state. The detectives hoped they would find answers in Heather's cell phone records. When they received the report, they saw that Heather was very active on her phone, including on the night she died. The last conversation she had on the phone took place at 3:12 a.m. and lasted 30 seconds. Now the police needed to find out who that phone number belonged to. 36 hours after Heather's death, the police obtained another CCTV footage. While analyzing it, the investigators saw a white car driving up to her house at about 3 a.m. It coincided with the time when Heather stopped using her phone, and maybe it wasn't just a coincidence. The officers also saw that this white car drove away about an hour later. Heather, Celina, and Wayne were probably already dead by this time. The footage quality did not allow the police to see the license plates of this car, however, they were able to determine that it was a Cadillac. After the investigators received information from the phone company about the owner of the phone number Heather had called before her death, they had a name. It belonged to 41-year-old Curtis Clinton. It was with him that Heather had that 30-second phone conversation at 3:12 a.m. A background check on Curtis Clinton revealed disturbing information. According to the police, Clinton was released from prison in February after serving 13 years for 2 counts of felonious assault and involuntary manslaughter. He pleaded guilty to the April 1997 death of Misty Keckler, 18, of Fostoria. Misty Keckler was found strangled, naked, and face down in the bathtub with her hands and feet tied. It was similar to what happened to Heather, and the fact that Clinton was released from prison just 6 months before Heather and her children's death also raised concerns among investigators. Perhaps he went back to his old ways once he was released. Moreover, Clinton owned a white Cadillac. Thus, Curtis Clinton became the main suspect, and the police needed to find him as quickly as possible. After all, if he really took the lives of Heather and her children, then he had to be stopped before he harmed anyone else. The officers went to Clinton's last known address, but he wasn't there. A few hours later, patrolmen found a white Cadillac on one of the streets, but Clinton himself was nowhere to be found. They searched the car and found a receipt issued at a gas station on the night of the crime. The investigators went to the gas station to view the CCTV footage. On the recordings, they saw both Clinton and his white Cadillac. He bought water and beer and behaved calmly. By this time, Heather and her children were already dead. The investigators were afraid that Clinton might have gone on the run. However, they soon received information that a patient named Curtis Clinton had been admitted to one of the hospitals. They immediately went there and found the person they were looking for. He was arrested and taken to the police station. But Clinton denied any involvement in the deaths of Heather Jackson and her children. Clinton stated that he had been dating Heather for 5 months and that they had an intimate relationship. He said that Heather had a lot of problems and she asked him for financial and emotional support. Clinton claimed that he didn't know Heather's children well. He said that he had last seen Heather on Thursday, September 6, allegedly. He gave her $328 that day, and they entered into an intimate relationship. The investigator informed Clinton that phone records showed he had spoken with Heather at 3:12 a.m. on September 8. Clinton then said he had his days mixed up and that it had not been Thursday night but Friday night or early Saturday morning when he had last seen Heather. Clinton said he only stayed briefly at Heather's house, just long enough to drop off some money and then have intimate contact. He mentioned, "I did my thing and left," and he wasn't sure what time he got home. Clinton claimed someone else must have gone to Heather's house after he left. He recalled that while he was there, Heather seemed upset because someone had texted or called her. Clinton insisted, "I didn't do anything to her or her kids." When told he was the last person to see Heather, he replied, "I don't think so. I really doubt it." He added, "If something happened, I don't remember it," and repeatedly said, "I didn't do anything." However, the DNA evidence on the victims matched Clinton's. As a result, he was arrested and taken to county jail. While in jail, he called his mother, and the call was recorded. The court documents include details of this recorded conversation. Clinton told his mother he was confused and wished he had sought help. He also said, "You should know it would happen again. Now it's even worse than before." Clinton stated, "I just lose it. I don't know what it is." His mother responded, "I know we all have that issue, but we have learned how to deal with it." She said, "We should have really just forced you to go back to your medication." Clinton replied, "I thought I was just over it. I just wouldn't believe it would happen no more." Then Clinton said, "I'm going to go in there and plead guilty or whatever and just let them do whatever they want to me." Curtis Clinton was charged with multiple counts. During the investigation, it also turned out that 6 days before the death of Heather and her children, Curtis Clinton attacked a 17-year-old girl whose identity was not disclosed by the police. He choked her and forced her to have intimate contact with him. When he let her go, she went to the hospital and the police. At the hospital, doctors took DNA samples from her body, which also led to Curtis Clinton. Clinton moved for a change of venue, arguing that extensive media coverage had saturated the county at the time of the offenses and was likely to resume once the trial started. The trial court denied the motion for a change of venue. The court rejected claims of presumed prejudice, stating, "While in the present case the pre-trial publicity is extensive and adverse to the defendant, the publicity is not sufficiently prejudicial that readers and viewers could not realistically shut it from sight." He didn't hesitate to take the lives of Heather, Celina, and Wayne. And don't forget about the results of the forensic medical examination and what he did to Celina before she died. His DNA was found inside her body. He knew that he was facing the death penalty but did not want to die and therefore did everything to achieve a different outcome for this trial. He even remembered what justice was when allowed to speak before being sentenced for the capital crimes. Clinton neither begged for his life nor apologized to the victim's family. Instead, he lashed out at prosecutor Kevin Baxter and vowed he would win on appeal and have his case retried. "I don't respect the prosecutor," he stated. "Like I said, I will be back again. I know there's a lot of people who are upset here, but I'm the one who's going through this." He said the statement triggered disgusted GFA from a few of the 70 people at the hearing. In November 2013, Curtis Clinton was sentenced to death. He received a death sentence for every life taken, but this is not the end of the story. After learning he would face lethal injection for the brutal murders of Heather Jackson and her 2 young children, Curtis Clinton reacted violently to Heather's brother, who said he would rather have Clinton die in prison at the hands of other inmates. Deputies and court staff surrounded the handcuffed Clinton and pushed him into a chair while other officers restrained Nick Fee as they shouted profanities at each other in the Erie County courtroom, which was packed with relatives and friends of Heather Jackson and Misty Keckler, whom Clinton murdered in 1997. Heather's brother was furious, saying, "The only thing you should thank God for is they saved your life by putting your worthless ass on death row. I'd love to come over there and stomp your worthless teeth in, but I ain't being away from my family and my kids. Be glad you are on death row where my buddies can't find you. I wish they had given you life in prison. I begged for it, begged to save your worthless life so my friends could get you." Judge Tone's recent decision has kept Curtis Clinton on death row. Just 2 days ago, the judge accepted the jury's recommendation to sentence Clinton to death, saying the seriousness of his crimes outweighed any arguments for a lesser sentence. Clinton was also given a life sentence without parole for the horrific act he committed against 3-year-old Celina before strangling her. Additionally, he received another 10 years for assaulting a 17-year-old girl just 6 days before the murders of Heather and her children. In September 2018, Curtis Clinton's execution was put on hold. The Ohio Supreme Court agreed to delay it, which was set for September 15, 2021, until all of his legal options, including appeals, were exhausted. So, Clinton remains on death row. Even though his sentence is still in place, he won't face execution soon. Ohio has over 100 inmates waiting for execution, but Governor Mike DeWine has expressed doubts that any will be executed during his final 3 years in office. Ohio's last execution took place on July 18, 2018, when Robert Van Hook was executed for killing a man he met in a bar. Since then, the state has unofficially paused all executions. The governor has made it clear that he doesn't expect any more executions while he's in office. The reason? Ohio can only use lethal injection for executions, but drug companies have warned the state not to use their products for this purpose. The governor said using these drugs could lead to retaliation from the companies, which might affect the state's ability to get important medicines for people in Ohio. Governor DeWine said, "I've told the state lawmakers that if we want to start executions again, we need to change the law to allow methods other than lethal injection." But so far, the lawmakers haven't done anything about it, and it doesn't look like they're planning to. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching until the end.